Before we dive into this fascinating story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any upcoming journeys across the vast universe. The auditorium of the Galactic Species Classification Bureau was designed to feel absolutely professional and trustworthy. Towering crystal walls refracted light into soft patterns. The environmental control system kept conditions comfortable for 240 different respiratory systems at once. The central stage used advanced technology, capable of projecting a three-dimensional threat matrix, visible clearly from every angle. Everything in the hall radiated order, precision, and the kind of immaculate bureaucracy that had kept the galactic community running smoothly for generations. In the seating area reserved for the human delegation, there was exactly one chair. Someone had hurriedly bolted it to the floor earlier that morning. Ambassador Damon sat down, the first to arrive. He introduced himself to a few nearby delegates, though none seemed particularly interested, so instead, he spent his time reading the event pamphlet, becoming more and more amused. The brochure promised a revolutionary threat classification system, accompanied by cheerfully exaggerated illustrations. Alien species holding hands, tentacles touching, and some crystal structure that might have been a hand or a joint. The auditorium quickly filled as representatives from across the galaxy took their seats. Damon recognized several species from the xenobiology materials he'd studied. Valoran, insectoid bodies arranged in perfectly ranked formation. Crystal luminids, clustering around light sources, their transparent forms refracting ambient energy. A gel-like creature sitting alone, vibrating at a frequency that suggested either deep meditation or deep frustration. Once everyone had settled, Brilia, the Valoran head of classification, stepped onto the stage, confidence visible in every movement. But only seconds later, the confidence of Selena, the technician controlling the display system, shifted abruptly into confusion. Her mandibles clicked faster, an unmistakable sound of rising tension that required no translation software. "Is there a problem?" Brilia asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Selena hurriedly navigated through the data interface. "This file. I don't understand it." Her voice grew smaller. "This classification code doesn't match any standard in our system." Damon leaned forward, clearly delighted by the sudden twist. Across the auditorium, delegates who had mentally prepared for the upcoming break suddenly snapped into full alert. Nothing livens up an administrative meeting like watching bureaucracy collapse in real time. Brilia stepped off the stage to check the display herself. Her sensor antennae folded tight against her head, and the clicking of her mandibles accelerated. A species-specific alarm signal. Show the raw data, disable all visual formatting. The elegant classification pyramid vanished. In its place, dense columns of technical data cascaded downward like an uncontrolled stream of information buried deep within the structure. Highlighted in a blinking red warning was the entry for Homo sapiens. Instead of a tidy classification code, the field displayed a single line. Regulatory paradox, do not engage. The room fell into a heavy electric silence, the kind that precedes either a major revelation or a major disaster. Marx, the crystalline delegate, vibrated at such a high frequency that the water glass on the podium cracked. Galex, an insectoid council member famed for emotional discipline, emitted a sharp screech and promptly collapsed sideways. Even the gelatinous being at the back managed to look distinctly disturbed, despite lacking features to express emotion clearly. Damon broke the tension. "Well, that is a type of classification," he said. "Just not one of the categories shown in the brochure." He held up the pamphlet, full of cheerful illustrations and a simple, friendly threat pyramid. This thing doesn't mention anything about a regulatory paradox. Brillia's voice came through the translator sounding strained, as if she were holding herself together by sheer professionalism. This file is not supposed to be accessed through standard protocols. This file is not supposed to exist in the primary database, and it is certainly not supposed to appear during a presentation in front of 240 delegations. But it's here anyway. Damon shrugged casually. So, what does regulatory paradox mean? Is it above apex predator? Or is it some kind of sideways category? The environmental system began working overtime as the collective respiration of dozens of species spiked simultaneously. Someone accidentally triggered the emergency mist system, even though nothing was actually on fire. A soft fog filled the room, making the red warning on the screen glow even more ominously. At that moment, Nilara, the bureau chief, emerged from a side corridor Damon hadn't noticed before. She moved with slow, deliberate glides, the kind of movement belonging to someone who had witnessed far too many bureaucratic disasters to be surprised by a new one. Her slug-like body left a faint, bioluminescent trail as she approached the control panel. Her two eye stalks extended, examined the screen, then slowly retracted before turning toward Damon, with the exhausted realization of someone whose peaceful afternoon had just transformed into paperwork-induced catastrophe. "Ambassador," she said, with the authority of a woman who had run galactic administration longer than some species had existed in space. "I believe we should discuss this somewhere more private." Damon gestured broadly around the hall. "I think everyone here is very interested already. This presentation was advertised as a fully comprehensive threat classification system, and it seems my species showing up in a mysterious hidden category is rather relevant to that comprehensive claim." Nilara's eye stalks drooped slightly, a mix of resignation and worry. That classification exists because every attempt to assess humanity's threat level using standard protocols has resulted in complications. "What kind of complications?" Damon asked. "The kind that make entire research teams request to be reassigned." Damon stood up, prompting several delegates to flinch. He walked over to his bag. Manx, the crystalline delegate, began to vibrate anxiously, producing a shimmering hum. Damon opened the bag, and Galex, who had only just recovered from a previous panic, promptly fainted again, overwhelmed by implication alone. From inside, Damon pulled out a folder filled with paper. Humanity, somehow, still used physical documents, the kind that couldn't be remotely erased or conveniently corrupted like digital data. "The funny thing is," Damon said casually, as he stepped back onto the stage, flipping the folder open, "I did some research before this meeting, called in a few favors, checked certain diplomatic archives, talked to a few xenobiologists who looked extremely stressed. It turns out humanity has been subjected to classification attempts quite a lot, specifically 17 official studies." The bioluminescent streak along Nilara's back pulsed sharply. The translator labeled it as acute administrative stress. "Ambassador, those files were classified because—" "Were classified," Damon corrected. "Someone forgot to update access permissions when Earth joined the galactic community. Paperwork errors. Happens all the time." He opened the folder. "Study 1. Assessment of pack behavior dynamics in Homo sapiens." The title sounded perfectly scientific, rigorously structured. They placed a group of humans in a neutral environment to observe how social hierarchy forms, how they compete for resources, and how they establish territory. Damon glanced around the hall. Pretty standard procedure for evaluating a coordinated predator species, right? No one answered. The entire chamber fell into the kind of silence reserved for ancient rituals, or the announcement of something catastrophic. Damon continued reading. Day 5. The human participants formed a labor union. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. They demanded improved research conditions, filed formal complaints about observation protocols, and negotiated for better meal quality. Damon flipped the page as casually as if he were reading a weather report. By day 8, he said, the research team had agreed to all demands. And then the study was terminated because, quote, the subject species successfully unionized the entire experimental framework. A sound escaped from the Valoran section. Hard to tell if it was laughter, despair, or a tragic combination of both. Study 8, Damon said, turning to the next file, sounding even more entertained. Full biological threat assessment using comprehensive physiological scans. Thorough, standardized, completely professional. He paused, but the report is extremely short. The reason? The human subject began holding conversations and building rapport with the scanning device. Brillia stared in disbelief. That's impossible. The scanner doesn't have sentience. Damon replied. The subject named it Hubert, asked how it was doing before every scan, and even brought it snacks, despite it being a machine. By the end of the study, the research team reported that the human was conversing with the scanner so much, they began to feel left out. Final conclusion. Experiment terminated due to unexpected social bonding between subject and equipment. Manx stopped vibrating. A silence settled over the chamber, the kind that felt like it had mass. Study 13 is my personal favorite, Damon continued. A massive integrated analysis, big team, heavy funding, cutting-edge methodology. A human researcher had been assigned to observe the project, purely to learn about intergalactic scientific standards. In theory, a harmless exchange of knowledge. But after just 2 days, that researcher submitted a detailed critique of the methodology, pointed out statistical flaws, questioned the theoretical framework, and proposed several alternative approaches. By day 4, they had, more or less, taken over the project and begun evaluating the people who were supposed to be evaluating them. Damon gently closed the file. The study was terminated when the project director realized the subject had infiltrated and reorganized the entire assessment structure. From the back of the hall came a burst of high-pitched, trembling laughter, the kind one makes after accepting that the universe sometimes operates on rules no one understands. Damon turned to Nilara. So let me ask again. What classification sits above apex predator? Nilara made a decision she would later describe as necessary but deeply uncomfortable. She opened a secure communication channel and entered an authorization sequence that hadn't been used since the Bureau was founded. Instantly, the security team sealed every exit. Around the hall, delegates reacted in all the instinctive ways their species allowed as they realized an emergency protocol had just been triggered. Nilara's voice came through the auditorium speakers. What you are about to witness falls under the highest security level of this organization. This information is stored in a restricted archive, opened only when all 5 founding species provide simultaneous authorization. And we are opening it now because Ambassador Damon's question has made secrecy no longer viable. She gestured. A section of the stage floor split apart, and a cylindrical chamber slowly rose upward. Its surface was covered in glowing biolocks that lit up in different colors as they scanned the room. Brillia stepped forward first, reluctantly placing her foreleg into a scanner. Manx, still vibrating faintly, pressed his crystalline structure against the second lock. Other representatives, including species Damon couldn't even name, followed one by one to provide their genetic signatures. With a soft, pressure-release hiss, the cylinder opened. Inside was an ancient data core, completely isolated from every modern network. Nilara connected to it directly. At once, the hologram above the stage shifted. The tidy classification pyramid vanished. In its place appeared twisting abstract forms, structures that folded in on themselves, bending through dimensions the eye struggled to follow. Some shapes seemed self-contradictory, yet somehow remained valid within their own impossible logic. These are the discontinued classification models, Nilara explained. Systems that were once tested, but abandoned because they created more problems than solutions. They were designed to describe phenomena that fall completely outside all standard taxonomic frameworks. Damon studied the impossible shapes drifting above them. One model looked as if it were erasing its own definition. Another appeared to analyze the observer rather than the subject being classified. A label flickered into view. Recursive chaos. Its text rewriting itself endlessly. "Where's the entry for humans?" Damon asked. "I don't see us in any of these." Brillia spoke with a tone the translation software interpreted as conceptually exhausted. "Humans aren't in these categories. These frameworks were created long before your species was discovered. When the standard system failed, we attempted to map you into the obsolete ones. But that didn't work either. And all discontinued frameworks rejected human data as fundamentally incompatible." Damon blinked slowly. "So you made special systems for unexplainable edge cases. And humans managed to break even the systems designed for things that break systems." "Essentially, yes." Damon stepped closer to one of the rotating constructs. Several delegates made nervous warning sounds, as if urging him not to approach concepts capable of causing philosophical migraines. One shape looked almost normal compared to the rest. Beneath it was a label, orthogonal threat vector. "And what does this one mean?" Damon asked. Nilara adjusted the angle of her eye stalks. "That category exists only in theory. It has never been successfully applied to any species. It describes entities that are neither above nor below anything on the threat hierarchy, but perpendicular to the entire system. Beings for whom the very concept of measurement stops being meaningful." Damon raised an eyebrow. "Sounds a lot like what you were saying about humans earlier." Nilara gave a weary nod. "We considered placing your species there. The classification committee debated for an entire cycle. But then someone pointed out, assigning humans to an orthogonal vector is still an act of classification, which contradicts the nature of things that cannot be classified." The glow along her back dimmed, the universal sign of bureaucratic exhaustion. "We cannot even use the category created specifically for the unclassifiable ... because applying it to humans would, by definition, classify you." Damon absorbed this calmly, while around him some of the finest taxonomists in the galaxy silently reconsidered their life choices. A laugh echoed from the back of the chamber. Not joyful, but the sound of someone who had finally reached the point where absurdity was easier to accept than logic. Damon folded his arms and spoke slowly, confirming the inevitable. So just to be clear, humans broke the standard classification system, then broke the special case systems meant for anomalies, and even disrupted the theoretical models designed to categorize things that break categorization. Damon looked straight at Nilara. So that's the summary, right? Nilara nodded, slowly, heavily. Yes, and it is a problem we still have no solution for. And your temporary fix was, stay quiet and hope no one notices. Damon pressed. Nilara exhaled, the sound carrying the weight of an exhausted bureaucracy. At the time, it seemed like the option with the fewest potential disasters. Damon pulled out his communicator. The entire chamber tensed, as if he had just armed an explosive. He tapped a few lines rapidly, then smiled when a reply appeared. I just messaged my colleague, Dr. Chantel, who oversees the cross-species research program on humans. Would everyone like to know what she said? Silent agreement filled the room. No one answered, but everyone braced for impact. She compiled every report from all teams that ever tried to study humans. She built a full database explaining why our species doesn't behave in a way that fits any standard evaluative model. Damon glanced at the screen and read aloud. The phrase that shows up most often is, further study not recommended. Brillia's antennae twitched, an involuntary reaction. That sounds like responsible scientific caution, she muttered. That's not all, Damon continued. 17 independent research teams arrived at the exact same conclusion. Humans should be classified as managed uncertainty and left alone. Nilara shot upright. Managed uncertainty is not an officially recognized classification category. Damon replied calmly, it is now. Dr. Chantel formalized it last month by slipping it through a bureaucratic loophole. He smiled, that friendly human smile that somehow made the entire room even more tense. Humans are now the only species with a self-defined classification category. We classified ourselves while remaining officially unclassifiable. He shrugged. Pretty on brand for humanity. From the back of the room, the gelatinous delegate emitted a sound that blended confusion with what could only be described as existential fatigue. Nilara lifted her eye stalks cautiously, like someone checking whether the world had stopped collapsing yet. There is no category above apex predator, Ambassador. Your species is not above it. You exist, orthogonal to the system. Humans sit outside the entire classification hierarchy, because every time we attempt to place you anywhere, the system itself destabilizes. Damon tilted his head. What kind of destabilizing? Nilara pointed at the still flashing red warning. You befriend species that other systems label as dangerous. You adopt the offspring of creatures that should be natural enemies. You form emotional bonds with surveillance equipment. You reorganize entire experiments instead of letting them run. You critique the evaluation process while simultaneously demonstrating the exact behaviors being evaluated. She stopped, the exhaustion clear in her voice. Humans are a regulatory paradox, a unique case that destabilizes every assessment model simply by participating. Damon smiled, warm, genuine. For nearly every species present, that somehow made things worse. So what you're saying is, humans are too unpredictable to fit into any category. Correct, Nilara admitted softly. And instead of updating the system or expanding the framework, you just slapped on "do not engage" and hoped no one would ever ask about it. Another reluctant nod. Yes. Damon nodded thoughtfully, as if assembling puzzle pieces. So let me summarize, he said slowly. Humans broke the standard classification system, broke the special classification system, and even disrupted the theoretical systems designed for unclassifiable anomalies. He looked directly at Nilara. All accurate. Nilara's voice was small, but clear. Regrettably, yes. And the plan was to keep it secret and hope we wouldn't notice. At the time, it seemed like the least disruptive option. Damon leaned casually against the edge of the stage, far too relaxed for someone who had just collapsed an entire intergalactic framework. So the real question is, he looked out over 240 beings desperately trying to reorganize their understanding of galactic taxonomy, now shattered in minutes. If our species exists outside your entire system, and every attempt to analyze us fails, then what exactly were you planning to tell us when we inevitably asked where we fit into your nice little threat pyramid? Nilara's bioluminescent streak flickered in panicked bursts. Brillia pulled her antennae so tight to her head, she practically disappeared. Selena had long stopped trying to fix the display, instead staring at it like it held the secrets of existential despair. Finally, Nilara whispered, "We hoped you wouldn't ask." Damon smiled brightly. And yet, here we are. The real-time translator, already strained to the limit, let out a sound like an electronic sigh and died. The classified data chamber sealed itself, apparently deciding it had seen enough and should probably close forever. Unfortunately, the sudden lockdown triggered the station's emergency protocols. A chorus of alarms echoed through the hall. Every door slammed shut. Atmospheric systems shifted to minimal survival mode. Lighting dimmed to a threatening amber. Over the intercom, Security Officer Kuvis announced, "Lockdown will remain in effect until the situation is confirmed stable. Estimated duration, undetermined. Life support levels have been optimized for current occupant count." Instantly, the delegations reacted, each species in its own way. The Valoran clicked their mandibles in an anxious rhythm. The crystalline beings dimmed, their inner light flickering unevenly. A multi-limbed creature began counting its arms one by one to calm itself. The gelatinous entity quietly slid into a corner, vibrating at a frequency that roughly meant temporary acceptance of circumstances. Damon looked around at the sealed exits, not panicked at all. If anything, he seemed intrigued. "So we're locked in here because I asked where humans rank in your system?" Nilara corrected gently. "We are locked in because you compelled us to open a data vault containing material that triggers philosophical disputes. The lockdown is designed to prevent such disputes from spreading to other sectors." "How long until the system reopens?" Damon asked. "When every being in this room has been fully documented and confirmed non-disruptive to standard operations." Damon nodded thoughtfully. "That'll take a while, especially since I'm guessing no one has a protocol for the scenario, discovered humans are unclassifiable." Brillia lowered her antennae. "These procedures were written before humanity joined the galactic community, and none of them account for a situation like this." Damon walked toward one of the sealed doors, inspecting the locking mechanism. He ran a hand along the frame, studying the joints, then froze. A tiny maintenance hatch, very small, built into the floor's edge, tucked where two walls met. Was this always here? Every gaze, eye stalks, crystal facets, optical sensors, snapped toward the little door. Nilara approached, her bioluminescent stripe flickering in confusion. does not appear in any technical blueprint of this station. It should not exist. Damon crouched. And yet, he tapped the metal surface. It's definitely here. Beside it was a mechanical lock. Ancient, physical, using tumblers instead of biometric scanners. Anyone carrying something thin, like a paperclip? Selena, who hadn't spoken since the translator failed, rummaged in a pouch and handed over an alien equivalent of a paperclip. Damon accepted it with a nod and began working on the lock with calm, practiced movements, which only made the entire hall more tense. The ease with which he manipulated the mechanism made it obvious this was not his first time opening something that was supposed to stay closed. Nilara asked cautiously, "Ambassador, are you experienced with lockpicking?" Without looking up, Damon replied, "A fairly common human skill. We have a long tradition of opening things designed to remain shut. In museums, they call it archaeology. In intelligence work, they call it infiltration. I call it useful." A soft click echoed through the room. The hatch swung open. Inside was a narrow, dark shaft descending deep below the station. Damon turned on the light from his comm device, illuminating a thick layer of dust, evidence that this passage had been abandoned for centuries. This construction material hasn't been used in station design for a very long time. He leaned over the opening. This goes deep, might connect to the foundation levels of the original station. Brillia protested on instinct. The foundational levels were sealed. Nothing should be able to access them. Damon glanced back, voice calm to the point of discomfort. Clearly, something can. He stood, brushed dust off his hands. So we have two options. One, stay here and wait for philosophical contamination clearance, which I'm not convinced will happen before we all retire. Two, see where this tunnel leads. Might be an exit. Nilara's eye stalks withdrew slightly. Her species' version of we are considering too many horrible possibilities at once. There may be very good reasons why this area was sealed in the first place. Damon beamed. Only one way to find out. And before anyone could object, he dropped into the tunnel. His voice echoed up the shaft. There's a ladder, or at least some metal bars. Seems sturdy enough. Come on, it's completely safe. The phrase completely safe, spoken by a human while climbing into an unregistered archaeological abyss, did not reassure anyone. But the alternative was remaining in a locked chamber with limited air circulation. So, one by one, the delegates reluctantly approached the opening. Manx peered down, crystalline body refracting the dim light. This seems unwise. Most things involving humans are, Nilara admitted, leaning closer. She exhaled, a sound that transcended all language barriers. But he's right. We don't have a better option. And so, one creature after another, the representatives of galactic civilization descended into the forgotten depths, following a human, because absurdly enough, it was the less risky option. The descent. The climb went on far longer than anyone expected. The rungs seemed designed for a species that had gone extinct ages ago, forcing most delegates into awkward contortions, half climbing, half sliding, half regretting every diplomatic decision that led them here. Damon's device cast the only light, creating long, shifting shadows along corroded pipes that looked almost like dormant creatures watching them pass. At last, the tunnel opened into an enormous chamber, a space so vast that the light couldn't reach its outer walls. The darkness wasn't natural. It felt deliberate, like a veil drawn across something ancient. Damon swept his light across one of the massive surfaces, and every delegate froze. Brillia snapped her antenna upright, a biological reaction equivalent to touching a live wire. That's a classification archive. She moved closer, voice trembling. Original taxonomy records, from when the Bureau was first founded. But these records weren't displayed on any screen, nor stored in crystal data matrices. Instead, every fragment of information was carved directly into stone, using a technique older than any known archival method. The name of every species the galactic community had ever encountered spiraled across the surface, arranged in dense, interlocking rings that formed a labyrinth of ancient script. Nilara extended both eye stalks, examining multiple heights at once. This is the first classification archive, the place where the earliest evaluation frameworks were developed. It should have been dismantled when we transitioned to digital records. Damon brushed his hand across the stone, across letters that had existed longer than some current civilizations. Looks like someone chose not to destroy it. Or maybe they believed preserving this mattered more than following orders. Mang stepped closer, the crystalline facets of his body refracting Damon's light into shifting bands of color. Those rainbow arcs revealed layers of older inscriptions beneath newer ones. Entire sections had been carved, erased, and rewritten again, over and over, almost in a state of sustained urgency. From across the chamber, Glex called out, his voice still wavering from earlier. Over here, these lines were crossed out and rewritten, repeatedly. Everyone gathered around the section. The carvings here were chaotic. Smooth engravings gave way to frantic gouges. Neat script evolved into jagged, desperate scratches. And in the center lay a crude symbol, something between a question mark and a threat assessment icon, suffering an existential crisis. Brillia whispered, antenna trembling with academic awe. This predates standardized notation. Whoever carved this worked before we even formalized symbols. Beneath the strange emblem, spiraling text appeared in languages so ancient that even the Galactic translation matrix couldn't identify them. Selena activated her implanted translator. As the script slowly resolved, her expression shifted from curiosity to fear, or at least the closest a pair of compound eyes could come to fear. It describes a species that could not be classified. A collective organism that didn't fit predator or prey because it behaved as both. The classifiers couldn't determine its threat level because the species kept befriending the evaluation team. Damon stepped closer, shining more light across the increasingly frantic inscriptions. So what happened to them? Selena swallowed softly and continued. The record doesn't say. It just ends abruptly, followed by a final warning carved afterward. She translated, "They will ask what lies beyond Apex. Do not answer." Silence fell over the chamber, thick, heavy, suffocating. Only the faint hum of the ancient environmental system remained, steady after centuries of neglect. Everyone understood the same terrible truth. They were standing exactly where a forgotten civilization had once issued a warning. And they had just triggered the very question that warning tried to prevent. There was another species like mine. Damon spoke, not a question, but a realization. Nilara's bioluminescent patterns flickered in colors, indicating deep, tangled emotional processing. Historical records only reference them indirectly, she said. They were called the architects of the diplomatic singularity. According to Nilara, this was a civilization that had encountered the early galactic community and immediately began doing things no one could understand, befriending species that should have been fundamentally incompatible. They adopted the young of apex predators. They negotiated with beings that hadn't even developed language. They convinced 3 warring factions to cooperate on a sculpture. Damon asked, "So what happened to them?" Nilara shook her head. "No one knows," she replied. One cycle they were active as usual, proposing increasingly baffling cooperation projects. The next cycle, they vanished. No war, no disaster, no trace. They simply disappeared. She gestured toward the stone walls. The only evidence they ever existed is here, in a record that should have been destroyed ages ago. Brillia, still focused on a different cluster of markings, stopped. Her antennae trembled as the translator worked through the data. "There's another section," she said. "A theoretical classification framework once created to account for diplomatic singularities." She paused, then continued. But the model was marked as a failure. It became self-referential and began classifying the classifiers themselves instead of the actual subjects. Damon exhaled softly. "Sounds a lot like what I read in the human research files." Brillia nodded weakly, then read the final line. The ancient classifiers concluded that some species exist orthogonally to the entire threat hierarchy. Not above it, not below it, outside the concept entirely. They had proposed a new category. Brillia glanced at the text again, hesitating before translating. The term is difficult to render, but roughly means entities who befriend the equation instead of solving it. Damon laughed under his breath. "That doesn't sound flattering." "It doesn't need to be flattering," Brillia rasped. "It only needs to be accurate." But that classification proposal had been rejected, because accepting it would render the entire threat evaluation system meaningless. From across the chamber, Galactic spotted another cluster of carvings, newer, sharper, more deliberate. A message carved only a few cycles ago. Someone came down here, after this place was sealed. The inscription reads, "They returned. Different faces, same pattern. Do not repeat our mistake." Damon asked, "Who carved this?" A voice rose from the darkness. "I did." The entire room reacted instantly, each species following its own instinct. Manx flared so brightly that he illuminated the whole cavern. Gex fainted again. No one could keep track of the count anymore. The gelatinous being in the corner began vibrating at a frequency that was difficult to interpret. Possibly enlightenment, possibly complete surrender to reality. From the shadows, a figure stepped out, a human. Female, wearing a station maintenance jumpsuit and carrying a toolkit that looked like it had survived several non-trivial explosions. She waved casually, as if seeing dozens of galactic delegates in a sealed archaeological chamber was the most normal thing in the world. "Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Chantel. Xenobiology got an automatic alert about a containment breach in this sector." She scanned the enormous ancient chamber with a professional yet unmistakably delighted look. Even though, according to station records, this place shouldn't exist. So this is a very charming bureaucratic mystery. Damon stared at her, unable to hide his surprise. "How did you even get down here?" "There's a maintenance conduit linked to the xenobiology lab," she replied. "I found it while repairing the lab last cycle. I was going to report it, but the paperwork was a nightmare." Her eyes landed on the stone-carved walls. and instantly lit up with academic joy. Hold on. Are these the original classification archives? Amazing. You have no idea how many research departments would do absolutely anything legally or close enough to get access to this. Nilara finally spoke, sounding utterly drained. We're trapped. There's philosophical contamination. Security lockdown is activated. Why are you so calm? Oh, I work with humans, Dr. Chantel said. A simple sentence, perfectly reasonable, given everything that had just happened. Plus, I brought tools. She set down her kit, pulled out various devices, and began interfacing with the old relay system. The lockdown can be overridden from down here, if you know how to bypass the relay grid. While she worked, Damon summarized everything. The classification crisis, the forbidden archive, the ancient warning about diplomatic singularities. Dr. Chantel listened with growing enthusiasm, like she was hearing about a fascinating research subject, rather than a galaxy-level administrative emergency. Finally, she stood up from the newly revived relay panel. So to summarize, she said, you tried to classify humans for generations, failed every time, and then decided to pretend the whole thing didn't exist. Nilara nodded, utterly exhausted. That is an accurate description. And there was once another species like us, who caused disruption not through violence, but through excessive friendliness, and then mysteriously vanished from history. Also accurate. And now you're worried humans will either disappear the same way, or accidentally derail galactic civilization. Brillia sighed. As simplified as that sounds, yes. Dr. Chantel opened her communicator and typed rapidly. Funny thing, Dr. Chantel said. I'm in a group chat with other human researchers. They predicted this exact scenario ages ago. There's even a betting pool for when humans would finally break the classification system. She turned her screen toward them. Someone named Alicia was demanding her winnings in the form of rare fruit. Alicia guessed it would happen during a major presentation. And she is very pleased right now. Nilara stared at Dr. Chantel, almost despairing. Your species knows how impossible you are to classify. Of course, and we think it's hilarious. Dr. Chantel pointed to the ancient, densely carved walls. But discovering an entire species similar to us, that's new. I need to add this to the research database immediately. But that species disappeared, Gex cried out, having woken up just in time to hear the worst part. Maybe they didn't disappear, Dr. Chantel said calmly. Maybe they just got tired of working inside a giant interstellar bureaucracy and went to explore something more interesting. Damon laughed. Yeah, that sounds exactly like something humans would do. Or something they would do, she corrected. Beings who befriend equations instead of solving them probably don't enjoy committee meetings. Damon's laughter echoed through the ancient stone chamber, bouncing off warnings carved by people who had once desperately tried to categorize the uncategorizable. So what do we do now? Damon asked. The Classification Bureau still needs an official answer for humanity. Why? Dr. Chantel shot back. Why do we have to be in that pyramid at all? Brillia twitched her antennae. The classification structure helps determine safety levels and appropriate responses. It provides order. But humans destabilize that order simply by existing within it. Which means maybe the thing that needs updating isn't humanity, Chantel said. It's the system itself. She opened a document on her device. I'm writing a proposal. Stop forcing non-standard species into existing categories. Instead, acknowledge that some species exist outside all frameworks and give them their own status. That is a deeply contradictory philosophical position, Nara protested. A category for things that cannot be categorized is inherently self-defeating. It is, if you treat it rigidly, Chantel replied. But if you treat it as managed uncertainty rather than a threat class, it works fine. You're not classifying us, she continued. You're simply acknowledging that we cannot be classified. That's all. Damon chuckled. I suggested managed uncertainty earlier. Nobody listened. Oh, I already made it official last cycle, Chantel said cheerfully. I slipped it in through a bureaucratic loophole while the approval committees were restructuring. Humans are now the first and only species with a classification status they proposed themselves. And that status explicitly states we don't fit any classification. Silence settled over the chamber. Every delegate had to process the fact that a human had infiltrated the classification system, created a paradoxical category, made it legally valid through bureaucratic loopholes, and done all of it in a way that was unmistakably human. At last, Brillia whispered. That's horrifying. It's amazing, Gex replied, sounding genuinely impressed for the first time all day. Very human, Nara concluded, her eye stalks drooping in resigned acceptance. The environmental systems in the forgotten lower level flickered, then stabilized as Dr. Shandel finished her repairs. Airflow resumed. Lighting brightened, and somewhere above them, the lockdown mechanisms disengaged, as if the station itself exhaled in relief. The exits are active again, Dr. Chantel said. But we should document this entire area before we leave. Archaeology will absolutely want full scans. No, Nilara cut in sharply. The glow along her body dimmed in tight, anxious pulses. This place contains volatile information. It nearly caused a full philosophical breach. It must remain sealed. The problem happened because you tried to hide it, Damon said. If you'd simply admitted from the start that humans don't fit the system, none of this would have happened. Nilara hesitated, then sighed. Perhaps. You're right. But acknowledging that our entire organizational framework is incomplete sounds extremely dangerous. More dangerous than a classification meltdown during a major presentation? Damon asked. In hindsight, no. Dr. Chantel studied the ancient warning carved into the stone, her voice thoughtful. I don't think those diplomatic singularities disappeared. I think they realized the galactic community was too obsessed with categorizing everything. So they left to find something more interesting. Maybe that's for the best, she added. Some species simply aren't meant to fit neatly into a hierarchy. And humans, Brillia asked quietly. What happens if your species decides galactic bureaucracy is too boring? Dr. Chantel shrugged, the relaxed, casual kind of shrug that terrified everyone present. Then we go explore something else. We'll send postcards, probably adopt a few unusual species along the way, and befriend whatever automated systems we encounter, because that's just what we do. Damon laughed, and the sound echoed through the ancient chamber, bouncing off centuries-old warnings carved by those who once tried, and failed, to categorize the uncategorizable. To answer your original question, Damon said, there is nothing above apex predator. Humans are not above it, not below it. We are perpendicular to the entire idea, and that's perfectly fine. It is not fine, Nilara protested weakly. It violates every foundational principle of classification, which is exactly why it's perfect for humans, Dr. Chantel replied. We specialize in breaking rules, while still being technically compliant. Back to the surface. The group began climbing back up the passageway, leaving behind the ancient chamber, its centuries-old warnings ready to fall asleep for a few more ages. As they ascended, Damon's voice echoed upward. By the way, one more question. Every creature tends to immediately. Do we need to classify artificial intelligence? Humans are developing some pretty advanced AI systems. They've already formed a book club with your station's security network. The sound Nilara produced was impossible to categorize. Something between laughter, despair, or both. Please tell me you're joking. Mostly joking, Dr. Chantel said. But the book club is real. Your security network is currently discussing Shakespeare. I resign, Nilara announced, apparently to no one in particular, perhaps to the universe itself. Effective immediately. Someone else can handle humanity's next classification crisis. There's going to be another one, Glex whimpered. Ambassador Damon just asked about artificial intelligence, Brillia reminded him. They finally re-entered the main auditorium. It was nearly empty, save for a few bewildered maintenance workers trying to disable a lockdown that had somehow already disabled itself. On the giant display, the warning regulatory paradox still pulsed faintly. Damon walked to the control console, and with the kind of confidence only a human could have, and that every other species found deeply alarming, he updated humanity's classification entry. Where it once read, regulatory paradox, do not engage, it now displayed managed uncertainty, engagement, discretionary. All done, Damon said. Official record. Humanity is now classified as unclassifiable. Order restored. That is not how classification works, Brillia objected weakly. It does now, Dr. Chantel replied. Welcome to a galactic community that includes humans, where categories can be adjusted and threat levels aren't the center of the universe anymore. Nilara stared at the updated entry, her eye stalks trembling as though centuries of her career had just folded in on itself. I need to file an incident report, several incident reports. I can help, Damon offered cheerfully. Humans are great at documentation. We'll make it very thorough. That is exactly what worries me, Nilara muttered as she slowly left the room to begin drafting what would soon become the most infamous bureaucratic disaster file in galactic history. After the extraordinary meeting, the hall gradually emptied. Delegates returned to their ships, whispering among themselves about the day humans broke the classification system with a single question. Some filed formal complaints. Some requested reassignment, preferably to sectors far, far away from humans. Some delegates immediately opened new research proposals on the philosophical nature of diplomatic singularities. Damon and Dr. Chantel stayed behind, standing before the newly updated classification entry, one that shouldn't exist, yet somehow worked flawlessly. Do you think they'll ever understand humans? Chantel asked. Probably not, Damon replied. And honestly, fair enough. Half the time we don't understand ourselves. Exactly. Chantel laughed. Oh, one more thing. The AI book club. They've moved on. They're writing fiction now. Writing fiction? Yep. A collaborative project between human-developed AI and the station's alien security network. She shrugged. A little concerning, but surprisingly charming. The security system wrote a romance novel. Terrible quality, but extremely enthusiastic. Damon pulled out his communicator and typed rapidly. I think We shouldn't tell the Classification Bureau about this yet. Fully agreed. The two left the hall, chatting about xenobiology, AI literature, and the countless ways humans accidentally scramble every structured system they touch. The system updates itself in a very human way. Just after they left, the hologram flickered once and added a new line on its own, without authorization. Note: classification may change without notice. Human involvement in the classification process may cause the classification to become self-aware. Proceed with cautious optimism. The system had just commented on itself. A very human behavior, which meant one thing: the ongoing AI integration was happening exactly as everyone should have expected, and exactly as no one was prepared for. Meanwhile, in her office, Nilara sat down, opened the reporting interface, stared at it for a long moment, and then began drafting her resignation letter. In the xenobiology sector, Dr. Chantel was already documenting the archaeological discovery, records that would force the entire history of galactic taxonomy to be rewritten. In the diplomatic wing, Damon filed official report stating that humanity was now recognized as legally perplexing, and that every other civilization would simply have to get used to it. Deep below, in the ancient chamber, the centuries-old warnings fell silent once more, fulfilled and ignored, exactly as their creators once predicted. Some patterns always repeat, regardless of species or era. The universe stubbornly refuses to fit into tidy classification boxes, and the beings who befriend equations instead of solving them continue to confuse civilizations everywhere, not through hostility, but through relentless, inexplicable friendliness. And that is perfectly fine. Not everything needs a proper place in a hierarchy to matter. Some exist exactly as they are meant to, orthogonal to expectations, outside every system, entirely unfazed by the chaos they unintentionally cause. Humanity had finally found its place in the galactic community, not above anyone, not below anyone, but in an entirely different direction, orthogonal to order, out of phase with bureaucracy, exactly where they belong. And this is just one story among countless others. If you want to hear more strange and delightful journeys like this, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.